My name's Chris, and today I'm going to show you a beginning lesson on how to play the piano. So first things first, positioning yourself at the piano. So the first thing you want to look for is the name brand of the piano, and that is always located above the keyboard in the direct center of the piano. So if you look at this instrument, you can actually see the name brand of the piano, Kramberger, right there in the center. Don't mind my friends sitting on top of the piano, they're just observing today's lesson. They're learning right along with you guys. So once I get myself seated right in the center of the piano, I want to make sure that I'm sitting correctly on the bench. And the way to do this is you set the bench far enough away so that you make sure that your bottom is completely on the bench and that the back part of your thigh is off the bench right between the keyboard and the bench, and that your knees are resting just underneath the keyboard. And when you put your hands on the piano, you want to set your hands on the piano and look down and make sure that your arm right here is pretty much a straight line from your elbow all the way down to the keyboard. Your elbow should be near your body and not stretched out like this. But also, you don't want to be hunched over like this because that's not good for piano playing. So you just want to make sure that your your arms make a nice straight line from your elbow to the keyboard. Now, I'm going to go back and double check, make sure I'm sitting right in the middle of the piano. I'm sitting on the bench correctly. I want to be right in the middle, that way I'm equal distance between the bottom end of the keyboard and the top end of the keyboard. Sitting here, make sure I set my hands on the piano. Everything looks good. This is a nice straight line from my elbows to the piano. I'm not hunched over, I'm not stretched out. Just look really comfortable. Good, and make sure we set it nice and straight. So next thing is, how do we set our hands on the keyboard? We can't just play like that. So we want to make sure that we hold our hands in a certain way. Now, for younger students who have smaller hands, I use the analogy of holding an egg. And I use that analogy because when you hold an egg, you have to hold it very delicately, otherwise you're going to squish it. And if you squish it, you're going to make a mess. There's going to be a yolk all over. So with my younger students, they hold the egg. Make sure they hold it nice and gently so everything stays nice and loose. You don't want to tense up, risk breaking that egg. So, at which point we move our hands over just above the keys, and we roll our hands over. We make sure that we're still holding the egg, and that we set our hands on top of the keys. At this point, their fingers should be nice and curved over the keys. And this is when you double check all of those things we talked about before. Make sure they're sitting in the center of the piano and that their arm creates a straight line from their elbow all the way to the keyboard. And now their fingers are nice and curved. For adult students or older students who have bigger hands, you don't need to use an egg. An egg would be too small. You can use something like a baseball, to kind of give you that visual. This way, you're setting yourself up for proper technique at the piano. And one last check, you want to make sure that everything right here, your wrist and everything, is really nice and loose. You don't want to be really tight because that's going to create problems and it's not comfortable. So you just want to make sure that you stay really nice and loose. So let's review some of the things we went over today. We talked about sitting at the piano, making sure that you sit right in the center, right in front of the name brand of the piano. Sitting at the bench, making sure that your bottom is completely on the bench and that the back part of your thigh is off the bench between the bench and the keyboard, and that your knees are slightly under the keyboard, and that when you set your arms on the piano, you create a straight line from your elbow all the way down to the keyboard, and you have your fingers nice and curved. For younger students, you can hold the egg. For older students, holding a baseball with bigger hands. Turn your hands over, keep nice and curved on the piano.